Okay, I'm starting to build on the next. I hate the way I always start with okay as well. I'm starting on the next stage of this. So uh, I still have for main. I added some stuff to it. We'll talk about this here in a minute. You don't have to necessarily follow right away. I changed this to enter name because I imagine this is going to be a place where I can like add a name. It's going to, a bunch of students, kind of like your lab. I'm trying to give you hints about the lab a little bit at a time here. So this is going to be uh, it's a form where I can like type in the name and add the name to the list on the other form. So it's going to show you how to like do things in between forms, but we need to get there one step at a time. So first of all, I also don't really need, if you look at, close this, got a lot of clutter here. If you look at this, I want to get rid of this event handler and the stuff that happens in it. So I'm just going to delete. And if you wait a tick or two, it'll show up down at the bottom here that there's a problem. Once it gets, polls around for it and finds it, you don't actually have to run it. Like I do that sometimes just to hurry it up, but if you run it, it'll compile and try to run and find the error right away. But if you wait a second or two, it'll show up. So just go ahead and get rid of that. It'll give you a hint too here. Actually, it'll give you a hint, but none of the stuff you want to do. So you'd actually just want to delete this line. And again, this is how you get rid of accidentally double clicking on something on your form and you got a mess. You could just leave it if it doesn't hurt anything, but I like to get rid of things I'm not using. So that's how you do it. If you don't get rid of that line in the designer, it won't run. So we're back to just the main form here. I'm going to pause and add some things and talk about them as I go. So I've added a couple of buttons to the other form that used to be called another form. I'm just calling it enter name, FRM enter name now. Let's make sure everything's right with that before we go forward. FRM enter names, form, constructor, yeah, so everything looks good. I've added two buttons. These are the common kinds of buttons you'll see. I'm going to squish this up a little bit because I think I have way too much space here. But again, it's not critical right now to get this perfect. So I've got these two buttons. And so the next thing to talk about is when you're talking about forms, and this is true of message box and stuff too. A lot of times when you load another form from a form in memory, you're using ShowDialog. ShowDialog and show as well, like messagebox.show. These are methods that make something happen, come up in memory and display, and then you interact with it. And when it closes, when it's done, it's a method. ShowDialog. ShowDialog is a method. Let's stick with ShowDialog for now because we're not really using show. They're very similar. They're just different how they behave in a specific way. But we're going to be using ShowDialog. So think of ShowDialog as a way to make a little pop-up happen from your form. It's technically a whole other form, but you treat it as like kind of a lesser thing that depends on the main form. That's the kind of paradigm we're using for the lab in this introduction to multiple forms kind of thing, where we have like they're called modal forms. They're little pop-ups to interact, and they're very strict in the way you interact with them. You can't make them bigger or smaller, and you have to click the buttons on them to make them go away. You can't go to the original form and interact with it until you dismiss this form. So this is going to be for enter name, and what's going to happen is we're going to double click. Let me show you. We're going to not double click. We're going to click on add, and that's going to make this other form pop up. It's going to be like a little pop up, and we're going to enter the name in there. Now the next thing you need to know about in relation to this is this concept of, again, the ShowDialog being a method that returns a value. The values it returns are these things called dialog results. So if you look at the button, click on it and look at the properties. I've called it BTN OK. Well, it should be BTN OK. If you look a little bit further down, there is a property of the button called dialog result. You can assign a dialog result to it. There's a standard set of them. This is sometimes called an enumeration. There's a set of possible return values from the show dialog and the show methods, and these are they. The one we want to do, and you typically will see that you don't have to name the button to agree with the dialog result, but typically you will, so you can connect it in your brain more easily. If it's the OK button, make the dialog result OK. What this is saying is that if you click this button, this form will go away and it will return the enumeration value of dialog result OK. And you can use that to symbolize which button, you know, to understand or get the data of which button the user clicked. Typically there's also a cancel. Cancel means I changed my mind. I don't want to do this thing that I'm trying to do right now, right? So how do we do that? Click the button, find the dialog result, and set it to cancel. So this should match this, and if you click on the OK button, right, BTN OK, then that should match that. Now you can also do one other thing. If you go to the form itself, and again this is a new form you're creating, but it should have an accept button. If you click that, that will be BTN OK, and then cancel. This is the escape button. I think even if you didn't have this set, it would work. It would return it, but I would go ahead and set the cancel button for the form. I'm looking in the wrong place. To BTN cancel. That way you can hit the escape to get out of it as well. I'm going to go ahead, because this is going to be done soon. I mean, we need it before we're done with this example. We need this is not the right containers, Windows Forms. We need, I think it'd be the easiest one to find. There it is, text box. Duh, that's day one of using controls, right? Text box is like the first thing you do after button, maybe. All right, so this is going to be, you know, like for entering the name or something. So the name of the student, let's go ahead and call it TXT. I like when using name, I'll often, some of my examples that I just have TXT name, you really should like add a little bit more to it. So, because name is such a common property for things, you know, each one of these controls has a name property for one. I'm interacting with it right now. So sometimes it's better to like say what the name's for, I think. But anyway, and then I'm gonna add a label. This is not necessary for us right now, but if we had a user, it might be. And I just wanted to like mention this too. If they're purely decoration, you don't have to change the name from label 1. If you never interact with it in code, don't worry about it. Just like change the text property. Okay. Now, also in these first few examples, I just want to make this as an aside. I want to mention this. We're not going to do a lot, if any, error checking. This is something you need to do in your lab. I would kind of do it as the last step, get everything working. It depends on how you work, but if we show the validation stuff, that'll be in later videos. So I want to concentrate on the basic interaction now, so you guys can get a feel for what's going on. Probably need to increase the font of all this stuff too. Let me do that real quick. Just select everything. Everything should have a font property probably, and just make it a little bigger for everything. Again, if you select everything at once, you get like the shared properties. Of course, then you have to like do all this. It's auto size false. Yep, make it true. And then rearrange things. All right, move this out of the way. Make this a little bigger. And maybe not put these right there. It's all it's a matter of taste. I'm not the best at this kind of stuff, so. All right, so let's demonstrate how this works. I'll pause and come back and show you. So, okay, I've added a little bit more to this. And again, this example is not going to totally look like it's doing anything. It's just giving you a tour of what you need to know in order to do useful stuff. So what I've added is first, for the button, let me get to it. For this button, for adding a student. Eventually we're going to add a student to this list box. And I'll say this too, before we even get there, I don't need 2 forms to do that task. I could do this all in 1 form, but I want to show you how you would do it between 2 forms, because eventually you will need, it's kind of like using methods. It makes sense to break forms down into multiple forms to where they have their special tasks that they do. Just for interface design reasons, even not even necessarily the functionality of the program, but just because it's more about making the human brain of the user run more efficiently than it is necessarily what the program does. But anyway, let's get back to it. So if I double click on add, I'm going to show you, this shows you how to actually create for the first time probably in an almost interesting way a new form. So what you do is you create a new form with the constructor of that form. So I'm going to do the inner name form again. Remember, form inner name is a class. We need to instantiate it into an object before it actually is something we can interact with in our program. So we instantiate it as a form inner name object, and we assign it to the form variable. And again, this is something you can do. Perhaps in the future, if you have special methods that your form does, you need to access other methods, you would need to create an actual FRM enter name variable. But for now, just use form. It's just the standard way of doing it. So you create a form variable called enter name. And then we're going to use that enter name to set some standard things. So this, we're going to try to make this look like a pop-up kind of form instead of a full featured form that like the ones you're used to, where you can maximize and minimize and change the size and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to prevent that. So we use the border style fixed dialog. I guess it makes the border look different. I don't actually notice. I don't pay attention to stuff like that, but it makes it look like a pop-up. And then we make it to where you can't interact with the form in ways to like change the size and stuff. So you set all these things to false. Notice this is a form border style. This is another paradigm you'll see in .NET a lot in Windows forms. Your form has a form border style property, and the values of that are a form border style enumeration. So this is enumeration is sort of a kind of static class that has all these specific values. If you actually look to see what the value of fixed dialog is, it's 3. Apparently, I was going to say you can find out like it's probably some integer, right? But it's easier for your brain to remember as a programmer that fixed dialog is 3 instead of just making it 3. Anyway, so that sets a bunch of things first for the form before you even show it on the screen. Then the next thing to do is to show it on the screen. This is how you do that. Enter name, which is the variable that this form that we create, a form enter name variable object is stored, referenced by an enter name variable. We use that variable to show that object on the screen. Got kids in the cul-de-sac screaming, and my dogs are not happy about it. So ShowDialog is a method that shows it on the screen, and then the user interacts with it, and when the user clicks a button, that button will be set to a certain result that's returned from the method. The return value is going to be a dialog result. So the return value of ShowDialog is dialog result. That's going to be saved in a variable I call button pressed. Normally I would call it dialog result with lowercase letters. It's sort of a standard thing to do. You could call it something like DR or something if you wanted to, I guess. But I want to show this is conceptually what's going on. The return value of that will tell you which button was pressed. So let's look at the actual form now and its code behind. Well, we don't need to look at the code behind because there still isn't any, but let's look at how we set it up. And I can't remember if I went over this or not, but so for each button, I did go over all this. So this has been set to return OK when it's pressed, and this has been set to return cancel when it's pressed. So we got all that set up. So let's run it so you can see what's going on. So when I click on the add button, all that stuff, the enter name.showDialog makes this happen. And then if I click on OK, OK is what's returned. So it says user pressed OK. And we'll look again at those if statements here in a second. By the way, that also has a return value that we don't usually interact with, but we can. I mean, I would say we don't. We haven't so far, but it's a common thing you do with a message box. You interact with which button was pressed. And that's later on in the chapter, I think, this chapter. Let's run it again. If I click cancel, you see it says cancel. So let's quit this program and look at the actual code back in form main. So you see, I'm saying if the button that was pressed is, again, here's another part of that paradigm. There's a dialog result enumeration. OK is one of the things it can be. Let's look at all the ones it could be. Again, they're going to look like what we saw on the form recently. So those first few things there are the common ones. So yes, no, cancel, okay. There's all kinds of different ones you can get back from a form. So if the user presses the OK button, this will be true, and it pops up this one. And otherwise, it's going to be this. I could have used an else here because I only have 2 buttons, but you don't always have 2 buttons. So I wanted to show you with the full if statement with the equals cancel, because you might have OK, cancel, yes, no, who knows, abort. There's all kinds of different things you can have. So I hope that sort of makes sense. It's another 15 minutes. I wanted to be shorter, but it's kind of hard to cover all this. So this is a bare bones example of how the dialog button, the show dialog stuff works. And remember, you set it here, you click the button, and there's a dialog result property of the button, and you set it to what you want it to be, and so on. I wanted to say one more thing about this, and I forgot what it was. Let me pause while I think. I don't really remember what it was, but I will point this out. Don't forget, you can set these things, all this stuff, before you launch the thing with ShowDialog. The examples in the book don't really show. I didn't find the code where it showed this, but it does have a box that tells you about it. So commonly you might, like, if you leave, by the way, if you leave all this out, which I didn't show it that way first, if you leave all this out, it's not a huge deal. It's just a cosmetic thing, really. But the user can notice that this stuff's here, right? And maybe the border looks different. I don't know. I guess, does it have a title? I think it probably does, but you can make this really big if you want. Usually you don't want the user to do that because it can get confusing for the user. Like me right now, where did it go? It's down here. Okay. So you get the idea. I haven't done the BT. I haven't done this.close yet. So that's what all that's about. Let's run it one more time with that stuff turned back on and see what we get. Click. You still have a title bar. I guess it looks different somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but anyway, you get the idea. So I'll have a more full-featured example when I come back in the next video.